Dr. Larson, welcome back. It is always a joy to have you here. I was hoping that you could share with us a couple of things, and maybe starting with the mental health library that you've been putting together to help families, patients, and kiddos to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. So mental health books are something that I'm really passionate about, and actually this is something that has evolved since I was an undergrad when I started reading about mental health and started kind of collecting an Excel spreadsheet of all of my favorite books that I used to recommend to friends and to family, to people who were going through various things. And I always had this vision that once I had my private practice, I would have this giant wall of all the books that I recommended, and I would loan them out to patients because I think it can be a really helpful part of treatment for patients. And then recently I kind of decided, why don't I just make a website with all of my best book recommendations? And so that's where the idea for the mental health library came from. And so, you know, and I feel like it can be a good service to patients, because if you go to Amazon and you Google depression books, you get 30,000 results.
My goodness.
Yeah. So many. And how are you supposed to know what's a good book? And the problem is that there are things that, you know, there are great books that are evidence-based and they're helpful and readable and they're great, great books. And then there are some that are just not consistent with the most recent research, and they're not accurate information, or they're not well written. And so they're just really not going to be helpful for patients. And so when you go to look for those 30,000 books, where do you even know to start?
Sure.
And so I feel like as a physician, I can make recommendations of the books that I think are consistent with my knowledge base and also readable and helpful for patients, and books that I know have helped other patients that I've had or people that I know personally. And so that's been kind of the idea behind the mental health library, is to collect all those books in one place so that people can have a resource to find good books.
That's fantastic. Well, and to everyone watching, so we're going to include a link to Dr. Larson's mental health library for you to be able to take advantage of, and certainly to share with family and friends. So Dr. Larson, I was also wondering if you could share, you know, some of the titles or some of the books that have really impacted you, or that you found really helpful in helping families to live their best lives and their children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard to narrow down, but I do have 3 books that I really recommend that I think are universally helpful books. And so I'll tell you about those 3. So the first one is called Authentic Happiness, and this is by Martin Seligman. Martin Seligman is a past president of the American Psychological Association. He's a professor at University of Pennsylvania, and he's considered to be the father of something called positive psychology. And so his thoughts about the field of psychology and mental health in general is that we have gotten really good at describing and treating illness and recognizing illness, and we have good research to say, you know, what do you do to take somebody who is very depressed, and what can you do to treat them to get them back to their baseline? The problem is that patients don't come to us and say, please get me to my baseline. They say, I want to be happy and fulfilled in my life, right? But we're kind of lacking in science to say how to do that and how to help patients do that. And so his answer to that was the study of positive psychology. And this book is a great introduction into the field of positive psychology. It starts out kind of giving an introduction in the background in the field, what we know, what we don't know, and then it kind of has some workbook type sections where you can kind of go through and rate yourself on how you rate on these things and what areas you can strengthen to bring more happiness into your own life. And so it's a really fantastic book. I think it could be helpful for anyone who reads it.
Oh, great.
Second book I would recommend is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So Dr. Frankl is a psychiatrist who was actually imprisoned at Auschwitz during World War II. And so his book starts out with his experiences in the concentration camp. And he's mostly focusing, you know, this is from the perspective of a psychiatrist, so he's mostly focusing on the psychological impact and the processes that are happening in him and in the other prisoners in the camp. And it's a really, really fascinating inside look. And what he observed in all the prisoners is that some of them would just give up on living and would end up getting sick and dying, and some of them would commit suicide. And some of them actually fought to live, and actually some people like him lived until they were liberated. And he went on to do amazing things in his career. And what he found to be that difference was that some people found some meaning in their suffering. And so he came up with the idea of logotherapy, and logotherapy is based from the Greek word logos, which means meaning. And so feeling that that it can be very therapeutic for patients if they can find meaning and purpose, and it can be helpful for all of us to find meaning and purpose in our lives, and that, you know, there is suffering is just an unavoidable part of human existence, and that if we can find meaning and purpose, that we are able to cope with that suffering and to go on and to do great things in our lives. Great book, I'd recommend. And then the third book is by Dr. Brené Brown. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection. And many people have probably heard of Brené Brown from her TED Talk. It was one of the top 5 most watched TED Talks of all time, over 35 million views. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend watching it. It's called The Power of Vulnerability. And this book is called The Gifts of Imperfection. And so this book is all about wholehearted living. And it's about courage, compassion, and connection, and these things being the gifts of vulnerability that we can cultivate when we can accept ourselves who we are and embrace our vulnerability. Then we can live wholehearted lives. It's a fantastic book. All of Dr. Brené Brown's books are fantastic. I would recommend all of them. This one happens to be my favorite, so it's one of the ones I would highly recommend.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Larson, thanks so much for taking the time out to walk us through some really great books. I know I'm looking forward to looking through the titles and the mental health library. So once again, we appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for tuning in. Take good care and be well.